And welcome to another episode of Patriots 4th and 2. I am your host, as always, Derek Havens, and joining me is Mr. Steve Balistrieri. We are both PatsFans.com bloggers. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Patriots lost on the road to the Arizona Cardinals 30-17, drops the Patriots down to a record of 3-11. A lot of talking points, both on the field and on the podium, or at the podium, rather, I should say. Before we dive into all that, I want to thank everyone who's listening live. Sorry, we're doing a show a little bit later than normal, but I want to give a shout out to Ian Logue over at PatsFans.com. Be sure to check over there for some great content. Shout out to Russ Goldman, our other co-host, who has been, summer Russ. It's traveling into winter, but you know what I mean, Steve. Summer Russ. Give a shout out to him. Please do subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and make sure to like us on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Like, share, leave us a review. Keeps us high in the podcast rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. Before we dive into everything, and there's a lot to dive into, Steve, as always, how you doing, man?
Doing good. I was very disappointed, obviously, with the effort. I mean, we did our predictions last week. I didn't expect the Patriots to win this game, but I expected them to be competitive, and they kind of weren't.
They certainly weren't. Really, it started from the beginning, Steve, and I don't know where you want to take it off. I mean, I guess we are doing opening thoughts, so I don't really want to drag us down too much, but my opening thought, I guess I'd leave it pretty simple and short-winded, which is a rarity for me, for those people who are normal listeners. I would say that it was disappointing, as you said. I thought this was going to be a tough quarter to kind of end the year. You have the Bills, who have really, really had their way with you over the last couple of years. Josh Allen's playing at the peak of his powers, and we'll get to that game and the other game, when the time comes. You have the Chargers team, who has a really good young quarterback in itself. You have, kind of a reinvigorated program there. That's not going to be any kind of picnic. And then the Cardinals, I felt like a team, it was a team that could be had, but they were still in it and they were still fighting. And it just looked like they wanted it more. They looked a little bit more comfortable. And the Patriots kind of fell into the same old pitfalls. And that's where I want to start off, Steve. So you start out the beginning of the game. Patriots go ahead and they win the toss, and they elect to take the ball to start the first half, which is the first time they've done that all season long. Mm-hmm. So I was a little surprised by it, Steve, but I'm thinking, hey, you know what? Coming off a really good performance in Indianapolis, going into the bye week, they must feel confident. They feel like they want to play from ahead. They got a couple plays going, and then tell me if you've heard this before. There was a holding penalty on the offensive line, and they couldn't overcome it. And it literally felt like, I know this sounds stupid, but it literally felt like the game was, you were already fighting an uphill battle from the first drive before the Cardinals even possessed the ball.
Exactly. And, as I've told you offline, I'll tell a lot of our fans and listeners here on, our YouTube channel here, do yourself a favor and turn on the TV when they play Buffalo, but turn the sound down and turn on Bob Socci and Zoe. And I guarantee you will be happy that you did. For one, they call a great game. And two, Zoe knows the game, knows the team. He knows most of the calls. I mean, he's been around doing this for a long time. And he can tell you where things are going wrong. And, he talked about right off the bat, that first drive, they ended up missing a 53-yard field goal. But he said, you had a bye week. You're coming off a bye, and your offensive line twice on the first drive blows assignments. And, you can't have that. And that it was just a really poor effort for the team, minus a couple of players who stood out, which we'll get into.
Yep.
But other than that, they just looked so flat, so disinterested, and I was just like, wow. After that first drive, it just seemed like all the air out of their balloon just went away.
Yeah, I mean, look at it. I mean, start with Drake May, who I thought had a good pretty good. Nothing spectacular, but he didn't even throw a pass over 10 yards until the third quarter. But he was 10 for 10 in the first half, so he was completing kind of what the coaching staff asked him to do. Now, I think the game plan was too conservative. We can get into that at some point. I thought both backs ran the ball well, and the tight ends kind of did what the tight ends normally do. The receivers and quarterback weren't necessarily on the same page the whole time. There seems to be a really big lack of accountability in that receiver room. Again, let's put a pin in that for another day, but I do think that's an issue. But the biggest thing is the offensive line, right? I mean, Ben Jones got his lunch money taken. Layden Robinson, it seems like every single week he has, this is, I think, twice in the last 3 weeks, he's had penalties on him that have killed drives, taken away points. Vadarian Lowe might as well be, one of those, it might as well be like one of those, attendance things on like the green line, downtown Boston, because it's not really doing a whole lot. People are just moving around him. He's scared. He's scared he's going to get beat, so he's jumping early, or he's getting beat because he's not kicking out fast enough, and then he's holding. There were so many times where, as much as I want to get mad at the coaching staff for not putting the ball in Drake's hands, it's clear that they feel like the coaching staff, when I say they, I mean the coaching staff feels like he doesn't have the time to throw, and they're scared to have him get hit. And I think if you listen to the CBS broadcast, based on whatever conversation they had throughout the week during the production meetings or whatever, it's clear that was echoed to that team, because it was like, hey, they know Drake can run, but they're worried about him getting hit. They want him to. There was the comment about him. They want him to dive forward, not slide, because they're worried about him getting a concussion, like happened earlier in the year. They're worried if I think Russ Tucker at one point basically said they have a left tackle problem, like specifically verbatim. It was pretty clear what the message that was coming across. And look, there's a lot to unpack there on the offensive side. Defensively, they looked like they were chasing the angles on the tackles, the tackling itself, poor. I think one of the things, Steve, that's most disappointing, and I know I'm kind of rambling on here, but I think that one of the things that's most disappointing about this season is there's a lot of players that you were counting on to step up that are just not. Look at the safety room, for example. Jabril Peppers, I give him a tiny bit of a pass because he was out, for a while. He's kind of getting himself kind of ingratiated back in there. Kyle Duggar has been around, and he looks like a fish out of water right now. They just paid him a good amount of money to stick around. They invested in him to make these kind of plays. It's week after week. It's been about a month straight, not including the bye, of really poor play from him. He had one big hit that was a nice stick later in the game when it pretty much meant nothing, but he had about 4 or 5 missed tackles. They had guys that were just lost all over the field. And, it just looks like it doesn't matter which phase of the game, Steve. It just looks like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. They just look totally out of sorts.
Absolutely. And, look, with the defense, early in the year, they were missing a lot of, their best guys, right? Bentley was out for the year. Peppers had that off-field thing. He was gone for 2 months. Barmore had, blood clots. So the middle of your defense took a beating right there, right? But now, other than Bentley, all these guys have been back for a while now. And it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting worse. Honestly, I think something is physically wrong with Duggar, and we'll probably hear about him going under the knife as soon as the season's over, because he just doesn't look like he's moving right. Peppers, he took a really bad angle on that 53-yard run by James Conner. But, and he missed some tackles as well. And that is so unlike him, Yeah, like you said, he had the big hit near the end of the game. But, even like Anthony Jennings, setting the edge this week looked like it was foreign language to these guys.
I think the problem right now, Steve, is that you're seeing a roster that I don't think they're getting good enough coaching. We'll get into the coaching here. I think on pretty much all levels. I'm not crazy about AVP's play calling, but he to me is lesser of the three evils, I guess, between him, Mayo, and Covington. I'm really disappointed in Mayo and Covington, because I thought that they were going to be able to instill and kind of preserve the defense. I knew it was going to be as good as Bill's, but I mean the ingredients for the recipe are there. He left you the cookbook, but they're just not being able to put it together. It's like my great grandmother had
all the same players.
Yeah, my great grandmother had this great tuna fish recipe. She handed it down to my aunt, my mother, a bunch of people. No one can recreate it the way she did. Maybe it's the same thing with Bill. I have no idea. But offensively, I do think there's a talent issue. I think you're seeing with May that I did think that there's been times in the Colts game and this game, both games, where I thought he fared pretty well overall, where it looks like he's trying to do a little bit too much. And I think that's only natural human instinct. He looks a little frustrated out there, and he's doing a lot of what he can. But if he doesn't have the line in front of him, and if he can't get guys to separate, it's not going to really matter. I mean, Booty, Polk, Pop, there were multiple times where the ball was behind them. It was overthrown. I couldn't tell. And I don't care who you talk to. Whoever is like your favorite, all 22 breakdown guy. And there's a lot of good ones that I really like. Unless you're really one of the coaches in that building, it's hard to really know, like, hey, did Booty flatten his route out too much here? Was he supposed to go a little bit deeper? Did Polk go too deep into the end zone? Was he supposed to flatten out? You know what I mean? Some of the ball placement stuff's pretty easy, where it's like, man, Drake, you got away with one. There was a couple of catches that went behind him that the receivers were able to haul in. That's kind of different. That's ball placement, but it's harder when it's like sailing over their heads. And you saw some things there that were frustrating. You saw the running game, though, Steve, I thought be pretty complimentary. Gibson seems to be coming into his own. Stevenson had a pretty good game. I thought both teams honestly should have run the ball more. Especially the Cardinals. I think Connor had like 16 carries. He should have had like 25, the way he was mauling them down, and the way the Patriots couldn't stop him. But, defensively, though, Steve, it's frustrating. And look, I want to give Christian Gonzalez his flowers. He deserves them. Probably his best game as a pro. I don't think that's unfair to say. He was in Marvin Harrison Jr.'s pocket. The
entire game.
And he was awesome. I mean, there was the play early. I think it was the first possession by the Cardinals where MHJ kind of went from the right across the formation, did a little drag route to the left. There was a little bit of a rub there. Gonzalez was trailing. I don't think he got credit for that catch and stuff against him. I think he should have, but I mean, I guess it depends if it's zone or man or however they calculate it, whatever. That's really neither here nor there. That was pretty much the only time that Marvin Harrison made an impact on this game. Otherwise, Christian Gonzalez literally was lights out. And he was actually mic'd up, and there's a segment on Patriots.com if people who are listening or watching want to check it out, because it was definitely worth it.
He's very quiet. I don't know why they mic him up, because he doesn't talk a whole lot.
He reminds me a lot of Stephon Gilmore.
Right.
Maybe it's just the quiet, corner kind of thing. Like, hey, ho hum, this is what I do, whatever.
He's not your typical corner.
No, he's not. And I think that there's pros and cons to that. So, but I think you've seen him get a little bit fired up at times. He just doesn't do a whole lot of talking. At least that what we hear. I don't know what happens on the field.
Well, they've had him mic'd up a couple of times, and he does very little, talking out there. He just plays the game. And I think, your opponents kind of respect that, because that's different from your typical cornerback. I know that, did you see the after the game when Kyler Murray came up to him? He had a lot of nice things to say to him.
To Gonzalez?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So, I don't know where you want to go from here, Steve. I mean, again, It was a disappointing game. I thought that there was a couple of good plays from Drake. That little shovel pass there to Pop was a really nice play. I'll say this about Drake. Again, it wasn't perfect. It's hard to know all the details, but it was a solid game. He continues to show me, Steve, a lot of poise. He doesn't look like a rookie. Doesn't look like the moment's too big. I would really like to see. And I know this is probably a little talk radio-ish, and it's one of those things where it's like you can only judge it by what he's going on. I would like to see them in a tight game with the ball in his hands and see how he handles that pressure versus him throwing a dime down, 2+ scores, down the right sideline, which was a great pass, by the way. But you know what I mean? I want to see when it's a little bit higher stakes. But
Yeah.
I mean, how do you not love? I mean, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the only thing Patriots fans are probably going to come away with this season, aside from our great shows, is watching Drake May play, because it does give you some excitement. That you have.
Yeah, I mean, he was 19 of 23 in the game,
Right.
And one of those 4 passes should have been caught, and it ended up being intercepted, from Booty. And, when I rewatched that, I mean, Buda Baker was bearing down on Booty, and he was going to light him up. And May threw the ball purposely a little behind him, so he didn't get earholed. And that's a catch Booty should make. I mean, it wasn't that far behind him where it was like, oh, it was a really difficult catch. That's kind of, I mean, you see wide receivers all the time reach behind him and catch that ball.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't like Booty's attitude. I mean, he throws his, offensive coordinator under the bus after the game. I mean, and they threw to him 5 times and he only caught 2. I mean,
well, that's the thing too, and they were talking about this on Patriots Unfiltered, and I want to give them credit for this. But they're talking about like where does this receiver? And I'm paraphrasing for them, so I mean they're all friends, so I know I'm not like putting words in their mouth, but they're all like friends, both of ours. So it's like I feel comfortable saying this. I wouldn't want to speak on their behalf, but like it's like where does this room get off with like kind of like this cockiness? Like they really need this veteran presence, and it's just not really there. Like. KJ Osborne really, he kind of flamed out. Javon Baker is a 4th rounder that's, kind of working himself, into the mix here slowly. And we'll see if he can make a name for himself in camp next year. He did clear concussion protocol, by the way. He was involved in a T-bone car accident. So that's where that came from, in case anyone wanted to know. But like Polk talking about how he has the best hands in the league and he's got vice grips and all these things. And honestly, Polk, I do think one of the things that I loved about him coming out of Washington is that he did have vice grips for hands and that his hands were tremendous and he played with such a swagger and such a confidence. And he just looks lost right now. I think he just needs a mental reset. Like he needs an offseason. I think some of these guys just need an offseason to themselves. I think Pop kind of is what he is, and he's a good player, but he's not going to be like a number 1 or number 2 player for you. He needs to be kind of, the middle of the order guy. And there's still value in that. He's one of the few guys that can actually get separation. But then like Booty comes in, it's like he's had his own issues at LSU. He had his own issues here as a rookie, especially with the gambling stuff. He had really strong hands. They seem like they're getting worse as they go along. It's just like this whole receiver room is just really it's like you're holding sand in your hands and it's just falling through the cracks here. And I'm not sure exactly where they go from here in the offseason. I think basically the focus needs to be, let's shore up this receiver room. And for sure need to tighten up the offensive line. But if you can keep the
well, you see, talking about the wide receivers, I wrote about this yesterday. And I said the biggest play of the day went to Kendrick Bourne, who caught that 37-yard pass in the 4th quarter.
Saved it.
Yeah. And that was a beauty. We already discussed that. Great throw, incredibly good catch, gets all the credit for that. But for the rest of the game, he only had 2 catches for 7 yards.
Right.
Douglas caught that 3-yard shovel pass that you just mentioned from May, which was a gorgeous play by May, because I don't think anyone expected that. In fact, when he threw it, I kind of went, ah.
What was so funny about that? I did the same thing live. As soon as they showed the replay, 2 seconds later, he did it so confidently and so calmly that it kind of actually made me like smile. Like I went from, oh wow, and like I was like oh god, and then I was excited they scored, and then I'm watching the replay like 2 seconds later, and I'm like, he made that look way too like nonchalant, like flip done. So that was kind of cool. I mean, on a day where you don't have many victories, that was one small thing to celebrate.
But see, other than that, 4-yard touchdown. Demario Douglas, the rest of the game, 2 catches for 8 yards. These are your wide receivers. Keyshawn Booty, right? he was targeted 5 times, had 2 catches, 1 for 16, which was a nice play, 1 for 3. You're getting no production out of these guys.
Nope.
And, when you're playing from behind, you have to rely on your wide receivers. You can't just run the ball, when you're down 23-3. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, they're going to have to break that group up a little bit, and they're going to have to find we already knew that we're going to have to add more talent at the top of that depth chart, but they're going to have to bring at least 2 guys who are more alpha personalities to kind of put these guys in check, because right now it's like the inmates running the asylum in that room. Like, the receiver room is out of control in my mind in not a good way at all. Real quick, Steve, I don't want to spend too much more time on the game. We talked about some of these strengths. I'm frustrated with the defensive backs. I'm frustrated with the linebacker play. I thought on the defensive line, really frustrating. Barmore was invisible. Huh?
They got gashed.
Yeah, they got gashed. I thought Connor took their lunch money, and he's a good player. A lot of respect to him for how hard he runs. Jennings was having problems. I did think that PI call, or that not PI call, that roughing the passer call on him was a little. That's a tough one.
That was
I understand.
ticky-tack.
I understand why they called it, but to me, he was already launching before the ball was released, and he looked like he tried to get out of the way. So I understand they want to rule out helmet to helmet, but it's like, dude, you have the replay. Like, this is one of those things where it's tough. It is tough, but to me, that should have been let go. That's just me. The Dietrich Wise, the Dietrich Wise horse collar to me was much more egregious. Especially him celebrating afterwards. Like, that was clear as day.
He celebrates a horse collar.
This is a veteran captain on your team. What are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, I just thought, I just thought that was so weird, right?
Very much so. But you know what? Isn't that kind of like a weird microcosm almost of like the entire team? It's like even your veteran guys. Didn't he win the Ron Burton last year? And I'm not knocking Dietrich Wise for one bad play. Okay, I'm not. But I'm just saying, on the season, it's like you have a guy that you think you trust their role, and he brings a good level-headedness to the field, and you think he knows what the rules are. And again, a captain, he makes an obvious dumb play, celebrates it, and then complains about it. And even Patriots fans were like, dude, just go back to the huddle.
I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, because I was I was the same way. I'm like, what is he celebrating?
Talking to people online who were watching the broadcast, talking to somebody who was in the press box in Arizona, a lot of people felt the same way, whether it was fans, media, like whatever. Steve, let's step aside for podcast purposes here right now. Take a quick break.
Well, before we go, I'm just going to share one other thing
please.
That I wrote about this game, because I think it sums it up, and then we'll take a quick break.
Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. I thought coming off the bye that I expected better. I thought they were going to play better, whatever. But this is what I wrote. Coming off of a bye, you would expect a team to tighten up preventable mistakes. That didn't happen. Coming off a bye, you'd expect to do a deep dive of your opponent, have their tendencies down pat. If they did a darn good job of hiding it. And then the last thing, coming off of a bye, you'd expect your O-line to actually, block people. Once again, you'd be sadly mistaken. And that was this game in a microcosm, because I'm sitting there watching it and I'm like, what the heck is going on?
It was really the epitome of just like anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And you know what? What did we always say, Steve, back when the Patriots were really good and back over the last couple of years? Good teams find a way to win. And what do bad teams do, Steve?
They find a way to lose.
That's what it is. And they're finding a way to lose right now. And they're doing a hell of a job
Bill's
with that.
Mantra. Because when when the Patriots would play a bad team, Bill would just wait them out.
Yep.
Yeah, it might be close for the first half,
but
they're going to shoot themselves in the foot.
Yep.
And they're going to beat themselves, and then we'll just run away with it at the end.
every single time. Anyway, now we'll step aside for podcast purposes. When we get back, we got a couple of topics to discuss, and then we're going to dive into our preview against the Buffalo Bills at Orchard Park. We'll be back right after this. All right, we are back here on Patriots 4th and 2. Steve Balsherry, Derek Havens, alongside you. Steve, we have a couple of topics to discuss. Do you want to dive into Mayo's post game, or kind of comments after the game?
Let's do that.
Okay, so I don't know where you want to start with it, but I'll just say this. To me, one of the things that's most disappointing about Jerod, as a fan, from a fan, this is going to be strictly from a fan perspective, Steve. I know a lot of people are wanting Jerod gone after 1 year. I don't think it's going to happen, although week by week, it's looking more and more like it's actually on the table, especially after this week. And I ran a poll on Twitter, which I'll share here shortly with everybody. But there's a question about play calling, running Drake Moore, talking about AVP. His answer is basically, you said it, I didn't. My theme with Mayo, though, is the reason I'm disappointed is because you figured this guy always was portrayed as like, quote unquote, little Bill, little Belichick, and had incredible football smarts. I don't doubt that. But just because a guy is really smart at football, or maybe, really, really talented as a coordinator on one side of the ball or the other, doesn't make them a good head coach. And I think that we've seen from literally basically almost the introductory press conference up until now, a lot of different examples of Jerod either having his foot in his mouth, saying something, the next day having to walk it back, maybe coming out a little too outlandish, not really recognizing it. I do think it's kind of funny, Steve, and I said this to you offline yesterday, that the same people who were bashing Bill Belichick for never saying anything in press conferences are now criticizing Jerod Mayo for saying too much. But, I think some people hopefully should understand by now why Bill acted the way he did during press conferences, because the more thread you give people to pull, the more they will pull, and they'll leave you vulnerable, and they'll take your words and twist them. And that's what's happening with Jerod. Go back to the burn some cash comments at the beginning of the year. He could have said, hey, we have the financial flexibility. Hopefully we can make some big moves, but the market will dictate that, yada. Instead he goes out and burns some cash. Then he has to go ahead the next day. Well, we didn't really mean burn some cash. We're going to go ahead, obviously make smart financial moves. But it's like he and Devin McCourty this evening, we're recording this Wednesday evening. It's a little bit different, December 18th, a little bit later than our normal time on Wednesday. Even Devin McCourty, I'm not going to speak for him 100%, but even he made a comment about how Jerod Mayo has a podium problem right now. And I do think that's an issue. I think he's asking for accountability from certain guys, not taking it on enough himself. And I'm not sure what's going on behind closed doors. It seems like the players like him. And again, I don't think he's going to get fired, Steve, but man, some of these comments, it's one thing if you lose and you just know you're not talented enough. It's another thing if you're making some really bad disciplined mistakes, same mistakes over and over, and then your head coach goes up there and honestly kind of looks like a clown.
That's a good point. I mean, think about it. When I saw the post-game presser, I cringed when he said, you said that, I didn't. And I was like, if I was sitting there right now, I'd feel very uncomfortable.
Hey, we've both been in media scrums, you more than me, and you in more in depth and more in the trenches than me. But we've both been in media scrums, and I have not heard, I think even Tom Kern, it was either Tom Kern or Albert Breer. I forget who. I want to say it was Breer, actually.
Yeah,
who said he's never heard an answer like that from a head coach. And I watched it, and I almost thought that like my internet skipped or I missed something. I'm like, he didn't answer that question the way he did, right? Like that wasn't coach speak. That was it. Just came off so distasteful.
Yes. Like I said, I was cringing because I was like, you just don't go there as a head coach and say that. That was terrible. And, I'm feeling bad for AVP because right in front of the whole world, your head coach just tossed you like a sack of dirty laundry under the bus. And I wrote about this also this weekend. I said something to the effect of, I was one of the people that said, I think it's almost ridiculous to think that they would fire him after 1 year. But after seeing that, because he kind of just snapped that out, like, and I was like, I wonder if he's under a lot more internal pressure than we're aware of right now. Because, of course,
It certainly feels like that.
yeah, because the way he snapped with that answer, I just thought that was like cringeworthy, obviously. But at the same time, I'm like, I wonder if they're breathing down his neck.
I think
And
he's
then
starting. I think
seeing
he's
the
starting
crap
to
during the
feel.
game, you know?
Yeah, no, I think he's starting. I think he's starting to feel the heat and the footsteps a little bit. Again, I know this sounds a little trivial, but like Patriots lose 30-17 to the Cardinals. But man, there were some real big issues. The Patriots didn't convert a third down the entire game, 0 for 6. The Cardinals were, I believe, 10 of 15, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And the Cardinals were 32nd in the league, over 3rd and 5, converting over 3rd and 5. And they were doing it with ease. I mean, Trey McBride just looking like young Travis Kelce out there. By the way, underrated player, really good player, and he ate their lunch money. But it's like they just look so calm. They could barely get a finger on Kyler, and that's not easy to do. He's a good athlete, all that 100%. But man, it's like there was no. It's one thing if they were to lose, Steve, 30-23, Cardinals pull away at the last second. We're not talking about missed tackles, constantly bad angles, blown assignments. The offensive line thing is kind of hard, but it's like we're seeing the same pattern over and over. I feel like we've been watching the same Patriots game for like 3 seasons. And I will say this too, and I know this is a little bit of a digression, but slightly. A lot of people are, starting to get on Jerod's case from a Patriots fan perspective and saying, well, the Krafts are dumb for firing Bill, yada, yada. I'll just say this. The Krafts didn't fire Bill because of his head coaching. They fired Bill because of where the team ended up now. But you can't remove the team builder and GM from the coach. It was an all-package deal. And the Krafts, for whatever reason, whether you agree or not, and we know that some people do and some people don't, the Krafts felt like it was time to move on. Jerod inherited a bad team because of continuously bad offseason moves. I mean, continuously bad. Jacoby Myers is having a really solid year. You don't think they could use him right now? They lost him over $1 million, which to you and I and most people listening, I'm sure, I would, maybe everybody listening, is a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of money to anybody, maybe outside of like Elon. But, it's like $1 million is $1 million.
Billions of dollars, 1 million is...
Okay, it's you find that in their couch. It's okay. But it's what I mean. It's like they're in the position they are in right now as a team because of the decisions that Bill made. And if he had a good quarterback, if he had found Drake May, let's say that Bill had drafted Drake May the year they signed Cam Newton, and it was a smooth transition from Brady to Drake, I think that Bill would have worked itself out. But when you don't have a plan in place, you find a stopgap, then you draft the wrong guy, unfortunately, in Mac Jones in the first round, and then you make some bad picks around him to not really sell, get talent around him. Well, then you're kind of handing this to Jerod, and I know that not everyone was expecting 7-10 or 9-8, this year, but the way it's trending, Steve, the same mistakes and the way they're losing these games, that's what, to me, I think that's where Jerod's feeling the pressure.
And I agree totally with Todd on this one.
And for those that are not watching, Todd writes in, Todd, what's up? Thanks for, commenting as always. Todd says, I feel like coaching has probably cost us 3 wins alone. I mean, I think you could certainly make the case for 2, for sure. But your point stands. We don't have to play the semantic game, but I agree with you. I know Steve just said he did too. I mean, there's definitely coaching issues that are on this team. Jerod's talking about going back to fundamentals. This is another thing we talked about off the air, Steve, yesterday. We talking about fundamentals and discipline and tackling. And I know that they're supposed to learn a lot of those things at the beginner entry level football, Pop Warner, middle school, whatever, but you're the head coach. you're the one who's supposed to teach them to do it. As the analogy that I used yesterday on the phone, if I hire you, Steve, to trim a tree, and then you come work for me and you go out and trim a tree and it falls onto a house, and you say, well, I just didn't, I wasn't really 100% confident. Yeah, it's your mistake, but it falls on me because I'm the one who thought you were ready to go, and I'm the one who put you in that position, and I feel like I didn't teach you enough to make sure that didn't happen. And to me, that's where Jerod, where it comes and ends. And I just don't think he's a head coach. He wasn't my first choice. I wasn't against the move, but he wasn't my first choice. And you can go back to the earlier shows and go back and listen. But my confidence, no doubt, is shaken with what I've seen this season with some of these in-game things, lack of adjustments, and some of the same old stuff, Steve.
Yeah. And I mean, it just continues. And the other thing I didn't like that he said, they were talking about the run defense. And, he says, well, if you throw out that 53-yard run from Connor, it's not that bad of a game. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if your run defense is solid all year long and, the guys are constantly producing, and then you have one game like this, or it's an outlier, right? And Connor goes off, has a big game, then you can say that. But when your run defense is being gashed far too often this year, you don't get to say those things. You can't just throw out a big play because your guys are giving them up every single week. And
Correct.
I just thought that was a really bad look too. And I know we're harping on Jerod Mayo, but I mean, after this week, I'm wondering if the Crafts are rethinking hiring him.
I don't see how you don't. We obviously haven't even talked about the CBS broadcast where they panned over to the Crafts. Jonathan Kraft had the little notepad. They're seeming to be talking about how the play calling is bad. I know there's a lot of linguistic, lip readers out there that are Zabruder filming the entire 5-second clip. Either way, they don't look happy. They shouldn't be happy. I hope they're not happy. I do want to share this though, Steve, real quickly. The poll I did on Twitter the other day, I basically just said, man, based on these tweets and memes since yesterday's loss to the Cardinals, I would say the vast majority of Patriots fans have turned on Mayo and want him out. Would you fire Jerod Mayo? Not what you think the team will do, but what you want. And 77.6% people said yes, he needs to be gone. 22.4 said no, he gets another year, and that was out of 486 total votes. So out of 486, 76, basically 77, almost 78% said that they want him gone. So that's kind of where we're at as a small portion of the fan base online. I thought that was interesting. It was actually higher than I thought it was going to be. I figured it would be, it was right after the game, a day later. I figured it'd be like 60-40, 77 to to 23. That's a big jump.
That's a real big jump. And again, talking about how the team is, one of the guys that we have a ton of respect for, Mike Reese.
Mm-hmm, of course.
Mike is always so level-headed, so even-keeled. He never gets too high, too low. I mean, if somebody makes a bad play, he'll say, yeah, he made a bad play there, blah, blah, blah. But he's not going to lambast them. But every week, Mike does his clearing out the notebook from, the Cardinals week or, whoever they're playing. And you and I talked about this offline, but, just read it real quick to the audience. And Mike writes, one of the best parts about football is that you most often get out of it what you put into it. So after watching the Patriots' uninspiring 30-17 loss to the Cardinals, and then rewatching the game upon returning home, I came away with this thought. The Patriots got what they deserved. It was an unacceptable performance for a team coming off a bye, and there should be genuine soul searching at all levels of the organization for how a team with a Patriot logo on the helmet could allow that to happen. And
absolutely.
I mean, that is some damning criticism. And then he writes, the number of fundamental breakdowns was staggering for a team that had a bonus practice last week and also worked in full pads on Wednesday. Poor angles, poor edges, and tackling on defense stood out most, especially from the more experienced players such as linebackers Jelani Tavai, Anthony Jennings, safeties Jabril Peppers, and Kyle Duggar. It also sparks questions about coaching because defense, after all, is Jerod Mayo's expertise. And I'm thinking to myself, when Mike Reese writes that,
Yep.
you better stand up and pay attention.
I mean, we always talk about the Sunday column, the Tuesday notebook. Those are must reads. We've said this 100 times on the show. Yeah, no, we're not defending. I'm not Todd. I'm not defending Mayo. I do think that they probably deserve one more year, but I don't know. I mean, I probably would have gone a different direction. I think it was a mistake by the Crafts to guarantee him a spot without doing the due diligence because you just never know. I told Steve yesterday again not to rehash I'm telling you, Steve, we just got to start recording our off-air shows so we can just post them because we might as well just do that. But it's like I was saying
a 2-hour show every day.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying to you, and I know you agree. It's like, who knows? Who knows if they would have hired Mayo if they hadn't guaranteed Jerod Mayo the job prior to them mutually parting ways of Bill and then him coming on. I don't think it would be him. I think it would have been Vrabel. But now I don't know how you go make that switch. I don't know how you go make that switch. I just think it would be a really tough look.
Vrabel even wants to come here.
Yeah, there was a report he does, but there was also another report I saw floating around that Vrabel was the Chicago Bears' first choice. So I don't know. I mean, I guess it just depends. It really just depends. I think that Mayo's going to get one more year, but I think that these last few games, especially if they get waxed by Buffalo, and I've seen a lot of people talk about how Buffalo might rest their players. Maybe you get an extra win out of there. Is that really what we're hoping for? Are we at the point now where the last game of the year that you're kind of hoping for that? Not to mention how important the number 2 seed, if not the number 1 seed, is in this conference, and that they're going to have to go ahead and try to push the Chiefs because they know they're playing probably Kansas City in all likelihood in the postseason at some point. So we know how important those kind of games are and that seeding is. Trust me, I think the Bills are coming out to send a message early. Now they have put up 90 points, Steve, combined in the last 2 weeks. They're playing at home. The Patriots look like they can't even hit themselves out of a paper bag at this point. So I'm not optimistic. Not to give away my prediction, but I'm not optimistic.
And Todd put up a question mark DEI. I don't think Mayo was a DEI hire. I mean,
DEI. Just explain DEI for the group, Steve.
Huh?
Just explain DEI.
Oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's
right. The Rooney Rule or whatever. So basically, the background is that supposedly Mayo had it in his contract that he was going to be the heir apparent to Bill, which is why the Crafts and the Patriots were able to circumvent the Rooney Rule and hiring him before anybody else. So I don't think it was like that. I think the Crafts genuinely really like Mayo, and I think Bill Belichick did too. I do think him and Bill, I think it's obvious, certainly on Bill's end, that he was very upset with how everything went down. I think he holds a lot of animosity towards how things ended and how Jerod is kind of, I don't know. I feel like there's more to that story there, but I think Bill definitely changed on Jerod quite a bit because it was never like that. But I don't know if it was like per se. I think they were looking at Steve and Todd, since you wrote in, as a business, and they were looking at moving one president out who's retiring, one president moving up, and making it seamless and trying to keep the whole thing together. And instead, I think they should have waited and said, okay, Jerod, you're definitely in the running. But we're going to go ahead and see who's on the market. We're going to sit down, do the proper interviews, and go from there. And that's what they probably should have done, and I think they're probably realizing that now.
Yeah, I don't think he was a DEI hire. I mean,
No.
The Patriots drafted him in the first round. He spent his entire career with them.
He worked
Bill brought him back as a coach. I mean, they really liked him. I'm sure they still do like him. I mean, he's been a very good soldier for the Patriots for many, many years. it might turn out that this was a little too early for him to be a head coach.
Yep.
I mean, but we know, when he interviewed for other jobs, everyone said he was a great interview. He seemed like he was ready to go. Perhaps if he had more experienced coordinators, things might look different. We don't know.
I see. I think that, and I said, I've been going. So it's funny you said that, because I do want to move on, but it's funny you said that, because maybe he had more experienced coordinators, and I've had some people say, like, well, maybe if he had a better roster, and I'd say, okay, let's play that game. Offensively, maybe he should have had a better roster based on decisions by the previous regime, meaning Bill, right? But he basically has the same defense as last year, and they went from basically top 5, top 8 to bottom 5, bottom 8. So you have this, and I'm not saying that Jerod should keep up the same standard as Bill, but it shouldn't go from one end of the spectrum to the other. I'm sorry. Like, it just can't do that. If it went from 5th overall in defense to 10th, we'd say, okay, there was a little bit of a drop-off. First-year head coach, no responsibilities. Covington, first-time coordinator, moving from defensive line, up the ranks, promotions for both of them. They're figuring it out. Bill's a genius, all these things. They went from top 5 to bottom 5 in almost every single category. And that, to me, is the scariest part, because it's like, that's your bread and butter. A lot of people thought going into the year, okay, they have a good running game. Yeah, the receivers aren't great. They have a good running game. They have good tight ends. We're worried about the receivers. We're worried about the offensive line, and you got a rookie quarterback. Everything else should be okay. And I thought it was some weird.
Defense was going to keep them in games, and it turns out it was the opposite.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, they're doing some things, but I mean, the guys that you thought you could count on, you're basically not able to count on them right now, and that to me is extremely troubling. Steve, can we move on to the Bills here and let's wrap this up?
Sure.
Let's go into the Bills. I guess opening thoughts, Steve. I'll go to you first. Opening thoughts against the Bills. Man, tough spot for the Patriots in this Week 16 matchup in Buffalo. Obviously, the Bills. I could see a scenario, Steve, honestly, where the Bills are a little fatigued because they've been constantly running up and down the field celebrating touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. But honestly, they've been traveling, and now they're coming home. I do think it'll be a good statement game. I know the crowd and them get up for this kind of a game. It's a division game. They really like smacking the Patriots around now that they have their fun and the Patriots are in their troubles after 20 years of us doing it to them. But, man, Josh Allen, hard not to respect what he's doing right now, man. He is just on a different level.
Yeah, he's on a different plane. I mean, you saw that pass he made the other night. I was
running left, tossing right over 2 defenders, like dropping it in the bucket. Like, get the hell out of here.
It was sick. That was sick. It was so good. And I know we're not supposed to say that because we don't like the Bills, but how can you not respect what he's doing for his team right now? I mean, and they're just on an absolute roll. I mean, I know the Lions defense is beat up right now and they have a ton of injuries, but 48 points against the Lions in Detroit. I mean, that's crazy stuff. They put 42 up against the Rams, who are a pretty good team. And, the Rams are actually on a roll themselves right now. So, they're getting their act together, but 90 points in the last 2 weeks. That's going to be tough for the Patriots because, with that offensive line, I know that Buffalo's plan, let's get up early and start hunting the quarterback.
Well, and the other thing, too, that, I think people are failing to realize, and, people want to mock the draft talk that I mention all the time. And I use the Bills as a perfect example. Look at some of the guys that they have on their roster right now that they have drafted and developed. Whether it's James Cook, who is really kind of blossomed into a role, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Khalil Shakur, some of the offensive linemen, some of the defensive linemen, who's the cornerback that's having a really good year for them, Brenniford. He's having a really good year. It's like they have constantly been able to replenish what they have going on, and Josh has really elevated his game, and he's such a hard weapon to defend, and we've seen how hard the Patriots are struggling to keep guys in the pocket. with the mobility issues. You saw it with Kyler this year. I saw him do it against, we all saw him do it against the Lions this last week. He's doing these bootleg rollouts, and people are scared to death to come after him because he's so big. They underestimate his speed because he's too fast. His arm strength, he can launch at 80 yards on the run. I mean, he is the thing is that we were talking about yesterday again, Steve, is that you can see the confidence he's playing with right now, and he just looks like he is just kind of finally unlocked it all. And he just looks even better than we've seen him in years past. Obviously it was a rough start. You could always see the clay to mold, and then it kind of clicked in, and it's been better and better. And I think right now you're seeing the best of his playing ability at this point of his career.
Yeah, absolutely. And with him playing at that high level, it just makes the defense's job, which is already struggling, right, even harder. Because not only do you have to defend their running back, who's, like you said, is coming into his own, he's playing real well. They have very good targets for Allen in the passing game. And then you have to worry about Allen himself, taking off and running. I mean, this is going to be a really, really tough matchup for the Patriots defensively.
100%. 100%. Let's I want to skip our normal kind of offense defense matchup thing this week just because I'm a little pressed for time, and I know you are too. But before we go to three keys, Steve, I guess if you were, and this is a little bit of a curveball, and I can go first if you'd like. If you were most concerned about one thing going into this game, aside from Josh Allen, do you have an idea of what that would be?
Protecting Drake May and not getting him hurt.
Yeah. I have a feeling that they're going to really I think Sean McDermott comes from a defensive background. They're going to spin that dial, and I think they're going to have to get ready for it. I mean, it's no secret. We're 16 weeks, 15 games into the season, if not 16 for, we're far into the year, and it's out there that Vidarian Lowe is I almost cussed. Sorry, Miguel. Basically a traffic cone out there. Layden Robinson's constantly getting penalized. Ben Jones is getting pushed around. On when he's been struggling a little bit, probably because of what's around him. Jacobs is doing the same. I mean, on when you and Jacobs are doing okay, but 1.5 out of 5 is not going to cut it, especially when you're playing a pretty good front with a good defensive-minded head coach.
Yeah, I mean, even Ben Brown, who's been pretty good since he got here. 2 really bad snaps, in the game on Sunday. And I'm like, now what else could go wrong? It's like he was at least steady. He hasn't been great, but he hasn't been bad either. But it's like, we don't need a fourth cog in the wheel to break down on the offensive line when you only have 5.
I'm with you. Let's jump into three keys, Steve. I'll go to you first. 3 keys for the Patriots to win this week.
I think first and foremost, you have to be able to run the football. I know it sounds cliche, but the best defense against Josh Allen and Buffalo's offense is to keep them off the field.
Correct.
And you have to be able to control the ball and control the clock. Now, not only does that mean doing those 2 things, but you have to score. You have to score. Which leads into the second key. I think early in the game they need to let Drake May play. Now, I just a minute ago I said protecting him is the number one, thing for this week. But at the same time, if you get so conservative with him that you fall behind, that's going to be even worse for him, because then they know you can't run the ball anymore, and they're just going to pin their ears back on every down and overload blitz. And, Buffalo does a good job of that. They'll mix it up. They'll come from different angles. And the Patriots' communication hasn't been great. Todd says, wouldn't it have been a good year to keep a fullback?
Yeah, you think?
And my third key, pray for a blizzard. 3 feet of snow. It takes away all the mobility that the Bills have. So, if your guys are slogging through like snowdrifts on the field, then they have a shot.
Yeah, good keys. For me, it's a couple different things, Steve. For one, I think the most important thing is just making sure that Drake May is upright. I mean, the protection's got to be there. The Bills are actually ranked last in the league with only 13 sacks. They haven't necessarily gotten home a lot, but they can create pressure. And I don't care if it's the worst team that, in terms of sack production or not. We've seen what this Patriots offensive line is, and I don't have a whole lot of confidence no matter who they're going up against. So that to me is a huge concern. So Drake May being upright is huge because I do think running the ball is important. I do think being able to do things more than just shallow crossers and slants is important, but you can't operate your offense if the quarterback can't even have a 3-step drop without automatically running for his life. It's a recipe for disaster, not only for Drake in terms of injury, but also for, just executing what AVP wants to do. The second thing to me is the Patriots really need to have some success, not only in the third down area, but in the red zone. The third downs, going in Arizona last week, 0 for 6, you get into the red zone, you have so many issues. We didn't even talk about the 3rd and 1 and the 4th and 1 failed to complete that and punch it in the end zone. The Patriots are not a good enough team to not be able to extend drives, to penalize themselves with holding calls or some stupid procedural thing, and not be able to come away with 7 in the red zone. And it gets tight in the red zone, which is why it's so hard. But they need to go ahead and maximize every one of those opportunities, because if you're going up against Buffalo, you have to be able to put points on the board. Fact of the matter is, I mean, that's just what it is. The last thing is the Bills are tied for 4th with the most 40 plus yard plays this season. They're tied with 10. They also are, let's see here, tied for 2nd with 52 over 20. So the Patriots, to me, with the way they've played defense, I'm really worried about some big play opportunities for the Bills. The last thing you want is Drake in that offense having problems moving the ball, and then all of a sudden you get the crowd invigorated because Josh Allen hits Dalton Kincaid for a 25, 40-yard splash play, and all of a sudden the crowd's rocking, Drake and everybody's sitting cold on the sidelines, and all of a sudden you're going to go trail 10 or 14-0, and now you're really in trouble. That's where, to use your snow term, that's where the snowball effect, the avalanche thing really can start piling on, and that's where I would get worried. So those are my 3 keys for this week.
All righty. Well,
prediction, Steve. It's time to do it.
Yeah, it's that time for a prediction.
You or me?
You can go first.
All right. I'd love to pick the Patriots to win. I just don't see how they do it. I thought they were going to win last week, and they, as I've joked around with some people, the Patriots offense right now looks like if you've ever been to a high school football game and the players run through like a little banner, the cheerleaders are holding, and like as they storm the field, and like if you ever see like, the banner doesn't break, and it's just like the football players either just like run into it or carry the whole thing. That's what the Patriots offense looks like. They just can't break through. And I think that they could put up some points potentially against Bills defense. I don't think they're not one to be had. I think there's opportunities there for them to run the ball and to go ahead and make it interesting. I just wonder how close it's actually going to be. Part of me is tempted to pick like a ton of points for the Bills. I think it's going to be closer to like 34 for them. I have a hard time envisioning the Patriots scoring more than 16 or 19. I'll say 34-16 Bills, Steve. I just think it's going to be a tough one for the Patriots. They're just overmatched on so many levels here.
Todd says they're going to put a 60 burger up on the Patriots.
Hey, you never know. You never know.
You don't. But actually, my prediction is more in line with his than yours. I mean, we just watched them put up 48 points against Detroit. In Detroit, they're coming home. I think they want to just, go on afterburners right away.
Sure.
Get this game well in hand and start, pulling guys off and letting their second teamers on in the second half. I think Buffalo cruises 51-17.
Oof, that would be brutal. I'll tell you, the only one that would be warm after that game is Jerod, because the seat on the way back home to Gillette, that would be hot. But I'll tell you right,
see how they stop them.
I have a hard time with that too. I mean, my message, if I'm Sean McDermott and to the Bills this week, Steve, my message to them is don't play with your food. go in there, take care of business early. Then we'll go ahead and, like you said, take off the reins. That's where I see the Patriots kind of gaining some ground back. I think they could put up some more points early. Maybe they want to make a statement. I think that would be kind of dumb. I would save it in the tank a little bit for the following 2 weeks, and you're going to see them again 2 weeks later. But it's like, go in, get your stuff done. And if I'm Jerod, on the flip side, my message to the team would be, look, don't look at who you're playing. Just go against the matchup and just do your job. It sounds cliche, but like, all you need to do is, here's our game plan. Don't worry about, look at faceless opponents and just go in and say, hey, this is my job on this play. I'm the left guard. I'm pulling to this side. This is the play we're running. This is my responsibility. Okay, I'm the receiver. I got to go a 7-yard in. Like, just focus on that kind of stuff and just take it one play at a time. I'm hoping if they do that, really what I want to see, Steve, even if they lose, even if by a big margin, what I really would like to take away from this is them just not losing the same way we've seen them lose all year, which is them beating themselves on top of being overmatched. That's what we're seeing. It's not just that they're less talented than the opponent. It's that they're also helping the opponent out. That's the most frustrating thing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's one of those things that, they seem to be regressing, and the Bills are, just on a tear right now. And
Sure.
You have to remember, the Bills are still chasing Kansas City. So they can't afford a letdown.
Yeah, they can't. They absolutely can't. That would be a crusher to them. Honestly, it'd be a huge upset if the Patriots were to somehow pull this one off. That would be a huge crushing blow to the Bills, just because of their standings and everything. And we've seen it, when the Patriots were good and they're playing for, standings right now. That's what the Bills are doing. And we know how important those seedings can be in those matchups. It's critical. Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
No, it was just a really terrible week.
It was.
The Patriots as an entire organization, wasn't it?
Yeah, thanks for everyone listening.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to report on what's real. I mean,
sure.
We always try to be positive here, but there wasn't anything positive about this one.
No, it wasn't. I mean, sometimes you just got to call a spade, Steve. So that's what it is. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of Patriots 4th and 2. For Steve Balistrieri, I'm Derek Havens. Please do subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and also make sure to leave us a review and like us on Apple Podcasts. Like, share, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It keeps us high in the podcast rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. I want to thank Todd for commenting in, those who are watching live and those who are watching and listening later. We appreciate you. Please be sure to check out patsfans.com for some great content, and we will see you guys next week.